suddenly there is this new standard where everybody has this tool, and the new challenge is not competing against each other with the tools, but competing with each other against the ideas of how to use it.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you're joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. Our guest today is Brian Athey, Chief Creative Officer at Push Digital, one of the top digital agencies in Republican politics. We spoke to their founder and CEO, Wesley Donahue, in a previous episode. Brian is a skilled designer with a long background in both campaigns and commerce. We dig into artificial intelligence on today's episode, how it's being used in the creative realm of politics, what tools he's using, and how you could start to incorporate AI into your campaigns. Brian, when we talk about AI, I think it's very easy to get lost in abstractions and what it could do in the future. What are some concrete examples of common campaign creative tasks that AI is being used for right now?
The easiest way to look at it is that you should really look at AI as a tool to perform tasks. So you're not asking it to do a whole job, but you're looking at it in the tasks that need repetition, or that oftentimes you need to delegate with the intent of perhaps speeding up your process or accelerating your ideation. So it's really about the delegation, and then how good you are at learning how it works, sort of educating it, conditioning it for what you want it to do. You had Ian Hines on a couple of episodes back, and he was talking about just the cadence of writing emails and how many times that he will write them and how many times he's trying to make them fresh or inventive or imaginative. That's going to take up a ton of time, but that's essentially like a templatized deliverable. Like if you've ever worked with email copywriting, like there's a formula that you can follow, at least that if you're trying to replicate how the experts do it. And what AI will do, if you can kind of teach it that formula, and especially if you can teach it that tone of voice, it will help you scale and generate those ideas much faster for a much sort of like wider consideration of audience or background or segment or demographic, whatever you're really like trying to write this content for. You can literally tell it to give me a pro school choice version of this topic, but you can also ask it like fun things like, write this like a Texan, or, put this in the tone of voice of Matthew McConaughey. So there's this great sort of, when I talk about scale, I mean that you can create tons of variations very quickly. And you can, as a creative, you don't necessarily have to start with a blank piece of paper, as long as the idea is already kind of moving, right?
Right. That 0 to 1, that creating. And if you can use the AI to get you started, I'll just, share with listeners a little bit of the process of whenever I'm writing questions for guests, I've started to, feed through some of the things that they've written, interviews that they've given through ChatGPT. It suggests some questions. They're not always good, but it starts to give me things to think about. So that's just one example in my own process.
And that's perfect. And what it does is, you already have the catalyst, like you've already started there with the idea, and that between inviting a guest on and talking to the guest, you've got a series of tasks that you've got to complete. So it's not going to decide that it wants to talk to Wesley Donahue about the new book, and it's not going to send you a message that says, hey, you should really have Wesley on your podcast. But what it's going to do is it's going to fill in all the gaps between your curiosity and your execution. And I think that's a really exciting part. But there are also like all these just sort of like daily tasks that we ask it to do. Like you can say you need to validate your code, or you're building a website and you're returning an error. AI is great at picking that up. Say you need to sift through a lot of data. Say you need to transcribe a video, generate captions on your video team. I think that there's just a ton of little applications like that when people think of AI, they think of this big, omniscient, talking to God kind of thing. But AI is really like things that we're already familiar with. In fact, like, I was talking to some of my team members, Eric Frenchman, who leads our advertising team, and he was like, look, AI is Chat GPT and all this new stuff. Like it's really cool, but it's also like there's a little bit of hype around it. Like when you are doing this professionally, you're sort of used to these automated and machine learning tools, whether it's from Google or Trade Desk or whatever. You sort of have the benefit of that.
Well, that's the first thing I point out to people when they're like, "Oh, is politics ready for artificial intelligence?" And I say, "Well, newsflash, we've been using artificial intelligence, specifically the branch called machine learning, for years to optimize our ad buying." But Brian, what about those more complex graphic design tasks? So like logos, branding. How is AI going to change the way you work? If already changing your way you work, are you going to be out of a job soon?
I mean, w- look, I think that honestly, that's the big question, right? Like, I think that everyone. It's weird that this started with art. Like, AI didn't solve
Mhm.
like hunger, or it didn't solve like doing your taxes, which I think it's kind of coming around to that. I'm talking to my neighbor that's an accountant right now, and he's sort of, but it started with art, which is like the most imaginative thing, and it started with sort of like a very sort of tactical application of art, which is marketing and branding and storytelling. And I think that it's this weird sort of existential thing that happened to this industry, especially creatives in the industry, where it's like, oh, we're all out of jobs, until we started using it. And I think that the real answer is that like this is a super profound tool with like crazy potential, but right now, it's just not quite there. There's this quote that I saw online the other day, and it's like, for AI to replace graphic designers, the client would need to tell it what they want, and so our jobs are safe.
Yeah.
Like I think to answer the question, like, look, AI can already do logos, it can do brand concepts, it can do mission statements and slogans, and um, it can write exposés and press kits and stump speeches and marketing copy. But I think that it where it falls short is that everything that it can generate, it's not necessarily good, right? Like, is that your experience too? Like when you're asking it, I mean, you even alluded to this earlier, but like when you ask it to perform a task, it's going to do it at lightning speed and with a ton of scale, but like it's not always on point, right?
Yeah, it's definitely weird. So some of it's in the training. So I kind of go the other way. I don't want to discount its capabilities now because it's all about how you train it, what you give it to learn from. But to your point about art, I was having a conversation at an art studio about AI, and someone brought up the say, oh, this is destroying art or whatever. I said, well, is photography art? Because there were people in the early days of photography who said, "Hey, you're going to put portrait painters out of out of a job," and so we think we all agree that photography is art. Um,
Yeah, where I came to really quickly was that it would be like it would be like introducing steroids into professional sports. Like if mid-season, the MLB came out and just said everybody can just like unregulated take all the performance enhancing drugs that they want. I think that it would seem existential. It would be like this is going to change the whole game until everybody is using it. And then there's a new baseline. It's like there is this new standard where everybody has this tool, and the new challenge is not competing against each other with the tools, but competing with each other against the ideas of how to use it.
right. The differentiator is what's your humanity, what's your point of view.
Casey Neistat, do you follow Casey Neistat, the YouTuber?
I do, yeah.
So he did a video a couple of weeks back, and he put in the prompt to Chat GPT, and he says, write a vlog script in the style of Casey Neistat. And then he goes to shoot that video verbatim. Like he follows that script verbatim. He follows the shot list. He says the words that it tells him to say, and it's hilarious, but it's also terrible. It is terrible. And he sort of says at the end of it, he's like, I think that this is a good demonstration. It's like while it can do this, it can check the box that it did it. It doesn't really have a soul. There's something in us, I think, that can still differentiate something that is authentic and something that is contrived. And to the degree that like we've got a babysitter that watches our kids that we adore, and she's in college, and her professors have even started to adapt their ability to spot generated essays and term papers, which I think is remarkable because it's so early. But like, imagine if you had a stack of essays to read through, and you start to spot the patterns and the inauthenticities, and you start to see like when the human actually writes. I think that that's an interesting thing that I certainly hope is pervasive amongst everybody. I hope that we get enough exposure to AI that we can spot it, because it is so accessible that that's really like what's crazy is like how it could be utilized and who could utilize it. I think that's the big thing.
Let me steer us back to kind of the creative aspect of this, particularly as it relates to politics. Give us a sense of some specific examples of what those limitations are with the visual AI outputs. Where is it still struggling right now?
The outputs themselves, there is a level of inauthenticity that I think that we've got to contend with. I think, okay, here's I think I thought about this in the sense that, like, if you've got a human, and you've got an AI analyzer, and you're trying to cull through a bunch of data, you're trying to do a bunch of data analysis, like the AI is going to perform really, really efficiently. But like, if you ask that AI to generate kind of an actionable plan that considers everything that a campaign has to deal with, cash on hand, and news cycle, and what the opponents are doing, and all that stuff, I think it's going to fall flat. There's this gap between quantity and quality. There's a gap between how much and how fast it can generate things, and how actionable or even like practical or applicable that stuff is. So I think that where it's falling short right now is that, like, I could ask AI to like revise that same plan 20 times, and it's not going to blink an eye. It's going to happily rewrite the same thing 20 times, but it still might not nail it. The human counterpart, they probably don't want to do 20 rounds of revisions. If they're moving quick and they've got the campaign mentality, they probably don't want to do more than one or two. But that plan is going to be much more zeroed in and much more easy to execute.
So my take on that is specifically like that example of cash on hand, which I just want to zero in on, which is I think we're about to find out that a lot of human cognition isn't actually that special. I agree with you on the soul element, sort of that hard to define thing, but the pattern recognition that we apply as political professionals comes from years of training and seeing this. And the more we can train the data sets, or more we can quantify what we're doing, I think the closer it gets. So then it's a whole new set of challenges. I think it ultimately frees us up for higher, better uses of our time. But the machine is always going to be better at logical decision making than we are.
That's if a campaign is always logical, right?
Well, and voters famously are not logical,
Or not,
nor are they
yeah.
consistent. Yeah.
What do
So
you think? What are your? I mean, just to kind of turn it back on you, like, how are you using it, and kind of like, where are you seeing opportunities and pitfalls? That's what I just
yeah.
revel in the conversation.
Well, so I think the best way that I have for describing this to folks is large language models, which is the technology, the branch of artificial intelligence that ChatGPT represents, and what we're talking about here is really, really good autocomplete. It
Yeah, sure.
knows what the next word to put in the sentence is, and that is really powerful. But it does have its limitations. It can only look backward. It's in the rear view mirror. I think, again, the smarter it gets, the more it's going to appear to be forward thinking. But that's going to be really the dividing line. So we need to tackle the ethical questions of AI when it comes to campaign creative. We don't have any laws or regulations yet, so it's on a case by case basis, by professional, by campaign, by candidate, to decide what is right and what's wrong. So I'm curious to hear what your framework is right now, how you and your team are approaching this to decide what's appropriate and what crosses the line.
This is like the question. This is a super smart question. I was hoping you would ask this. I think in politics, you're dealing with people whose primary objective is to win, usually at all costs. And so, unfortunately, there's not a clear black and white line. There's a lot of gray area, especially with the different levels of players in the industry. And I think that what AI does is outsource a lot of what professionals have been able to do in the past, and put it in the hands of anybody. I think that like what's really promising and exciting about AI is that like you might not know how to video edit, but you can talk to a chat bot and it will edit it for you. Or you might not be able to generate a great graphic, but you can talk to AI and it will generate it for you. So accessibility, I think, is really like where that ethical framework comes into play, because it's, while the industry itself is a very aggressive sort of all's fair in love and war industry, I think the public at large, especially when you think about social media and memes and stuff that gets generated and goes viral, I think incentive structures are sort of aligned to encourage bad behavior in some ways. And that's something that I'm super concerned about. I mean, do you track on that? Do you feel the same?
Yeah, I think there's a certain degree of moral panic here that we hear with every new technology, and that's going to be the case here in politics as well. But I also think that political campaigns and politicians are reflections of the voters, of the electorate. And so that's where a lot of the tension is in our business ethically. It is very hard to lay out clear lines, but one of my clear lines is if you are using artificially generated media, so audio, video, visuals, it needs to be disclosed what you're seeing. So the RNC's ad from a few weeks ago, after Biden announced, very clearly disclosed that these were AI generated images.
But the Trump being arrested by the NYPD, those images that went viral, like those had no disclaimer other than the context that they were shared in, right? Like maybe somebody said, check out this AI generated image.
Exactly. The person who shared them originally said, I had, the software do this. You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with Brian Athey about AI, creative, and all things tech in 2023 and beyond for campaigns. One of the best descriptions, Brian, I've heard of generative AI like ChatGPT recently is that everyone has an intern now, which again, I think is a good framework and basically saying it follows instructions really well, but may not have the ability to connect those dots like we were talking about. So in the op-ed that you've just published, you allude to AI being best leveraged as an accelerator for scaling ideas. Give us some more examples. I'm going to keep coming back to this of examples so we make this concrete for folks who are listening and worry that it may be overhyped, which I think it can be. But what are some examples of how it helps you scale those ideas?
I do use ChatGPT a good bit. Like I keep it open next to my Gmail tabs and my calendar. I talk to it pretty regularly, and I really, I've gotten into the habit of talking to it like it's a person. So I say like, oh, thanks for that, and good job, and hey, do you mind helping me? Where like I really do sort of like have these
You
conversations,
don't
and I think
you don't want it to resent you when it becomes our overlord.
I've been a director too long, and I want to make sure that I'm treating the people that I'm outsourcing stuff to do really well. But yeah, exactly. I want to make sure I've got some bonus points and brownie points, if in case things go south. That's I wonder if I'm doing that involuntarily. That's subconsciously. That could very well be it.
I really believe that you should not be polite or humanize the AI.
I can't help it. I really can't. But like maybe that just speaks to how good it is, because I really do feel like I'm talking to somebody sometimes. Here's like a really practical application. So I started as a graphic designer. I grew into sort of I brand and work on these big brand systems and stories. I create marketing copy and marketing pillars and turn that into websites and campaigns. Um, I think that like what's really fun is if you can generate something, and this is if we take a small example, like Adobe Express has just come out with their platform that's sort of the alternative to Canva. And the idea is that if you load up Adobe Express with your brand kit and your fonts, your colors, your photos, that it will very quickly generate graphics for you. So you can change the copy, but essentially like it turns a few small prompts into this visual idea. And then once you settle on the idea, you can scale it really quickly. Like you can turn it into multiple sizes and output it for multiple different channels. It's all about sort of that. If you were having a conversation with it the way that I do, what I try and do is like load it up with prompts at the beginning. And I'll do things like, read this press kit, or, read this article first, or I'll pull a bunch of copy off of a website and dump it in. I'll try and get it as informed and dialed in as I can. And then I'll give it prompts like, pretend you are an expert, or pretend you have a goal to, whatever it is, raise awareness, or raise funding or something. And then I will say, now ask me questions. Ask me questions for clarity. And when you say, talk to me and get all the information that you need to give an informed decision. And you can also give it prompts with like, and play devil's advocate. So give me a solution, but also tell me all the pitfalls to your solution. Those are really, really interesting ways that can like really expedite the branding process. And if you think about, okay, so now I've got this big wall of content. If you can give it some type of framework, like there are all types of different branding frameworks. We have some proprietary stuff at Push, but like if you can say like, I need brand pillars and a mission statement, and I need these things or these questions answered, it will generate those responses inside the framework based on what it knows. So what you can really do is like, you can use what you already have to sort of inform ChatGPT, and then it can help you iterate and fill in the gaps. And if you're willing to talk to it, what I say all the time is like, hey, that's great, but this is way too long. Can you give me some bullet points? Or this is great, but I only have 20 words on this website. Can you drill this down to 20 words? That is so much faster than trying to do it myself, like when I'm live in the edit, or when I'm talking to a designer and we need to trim stuff down quickly. But look, here's the other thing, Eric. Here's what I use it for a lot. So I had this conversation with ChatGPT, and so I'm both a maker and a manager. I'm in the design programs. I'm making stuff, but I'm also like on calls and in meetings all the time. And what I told it was like, I don't want to suffer burnout, and I want to be more productive. So I tell it a lot of things about how I like to work and what my schedule looks like. And then I ask it to ask me questions to help optimize my day. So I use AI just personally as like, it's given me an entire plan. Like you wake up at 6 o'clock, you go to bed at 12 o'clock, and 11 o'clock, I think. And, here's everything from when you should take meetings to when you should to drink, fill up your water bottle and drink water, because I tell it like, look, my goals are to stay hydrated. My goals are to make sure that I take a walk every day. My goals are to meditate. And so it works that into a calendar for me. And so it really has the ability to kind of like plan my day. It has the ability to plan trips, or to like draft talking points, or like all these little inefficiencies that can be smoothed out and add up to a lot more efficiency. I even use a scheduling app. It's called Motion, and Motion is like, I don't know if you've seen this, but like an AI
I've played
assistant.
around with it.
So it's sort of like kind of schedules your day for you. But I don't know. I'm really like, I think the real promise in a lot of this is automations, and I think that one thing I'm really excited about, I watched Google's conference the other day, and some of the things that Bard can do. And I really think, we talked about this earlier, but like if AI can't solve anything else, if it solves email by just automatically generating responses for me and replying, like that'll be enough for me. I think we'll count that as a win.
But that's like a big red flag and an indictment of email culture and behavior right now. If robots can just start emailing each other and our jobs are done. So for folks who are listening, you've mentioned a few tools, ChatGPT, which everyone knows about. Adobe Express has some AI loaded in. You mentioned Motion. What are some other tools that you're using on your day-to-day basis that our listeners could use to start helping out with their own campaigns or projects?
Adobe Express, definitely keep an eye on Adobe Firefly. Adobe Firefly it's a response to Midjourney. You can do a lot of interesting things with photo editing with AI. There are some great time savers, like if you've got like this podcast, for instance.
Are you about to tell people they don't need to listen to the podcast?
It's not at all listen, but it's you might not need to edit it as much. Like editing a
Get a
podcast is a
summary of the
task.
podcast. Yeah.
I've been dropping so many F-bombs that you're gonna have to cut all those out, right? So no, but what I mean is like if you want to do quick video editing and transcribing, like there are tools for that. If you want to do captions and resizing, there are tools for that. I think that the big thing, like I was talking about the automations, I think that what you're gonna see is our limitations right now are time. We only have so much time to invest in something that is untested and unproven when we are working for clients in very high stakes scenarios that we have made promises to. We know that we can deliver with our method and our approach. And if we automate all that away, or if we give all that away to a robot, who knows what kind of outcomes are going to happen. And while they do show a lot of promise, I think that we are not willing to risk clients' campaigns and money and everything else just with experimentation. So we only have so much time to really build these systems and automations out. But I think that that's where you're going to see things kind of really take shape. You're going to see like people using things like make.com, where you can get ChatGPT to randomize topics, generate a blog on them, but then you can connect other apps where it can post that blog to your website. It can post that blog to LinkedIn. It can, randomize and generate, and all that is automated. You can literally just give the prompt to the machine and let it run a marketing cycle for you. And that's not guaranteed that it's going to be good. And I would highly recommend that you
double check,
you proof that and spot check it. But like, I think that's the big thing, Eric, is that like this industry is so predicated on the notion that like you have to repeat, and you have to inundate, and you have to saturate, and you have to be ever present everywhere on every channel, every TV spot. It's just quantity of message. And I think that you're already seeing some real downsides to that, because you just look at the last cycle where people are just spammed to high heavens, and they completely check out of the process. And to go back to the ethics, I think that if we have any ethical obligation, at least the one that I hope that I adhere to, is that like I want more people engaged in the process. And if we are outsourcing our jobs to AI that is mostly concerned with output and scale and not necessarily concerned with quality, I feel like the real implications are that we're going to drive people out of the process. And whether that's like a small thing, like they get too many, well, depending on who you are, get too many emails, or you're just checking social media channels and the bots have so taken over your feed that nothing is real anymore, and you don't have a place to go to, like, whether it's to get the news or just disconnect. Like, I think that those little things, people aren't really thinking about how like this overabundance of content and everyone's ability to access it and produce with it. I don't think people are thinking about the real implications of that, because, I mean, if anything, it's almost going to, I predict that it will have sort of this crescendo, and then people will have to realize that, like, I don't know if just, complete and total message saturation is the way to get anybody interested. I think that there's a little bit of mystery and a little bit of brand exploration and a little bit of brand ownership is just as important when you are building these campaigns.
Well, I want to thank Brian Athey for a great conversation today as we dig into this question about artificial intelligence and how it's being used in campaigns. You can learn more about Brian with the links in our show notes, including an op-ed that he has written that shares some more of these ideas that we've discussed. If this episode made you a little bit smarter, gave you something to think about, it definitely did for me. All that we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague, and it's a win-win because you look smart in the process. Remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can also sign up for email updates on our website at businessofpoliticspodcast.com. With that, I'll say thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.